Welcome to the Exam Room Podcast, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, here at the International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine 2022, and I am here with one of the pioneers of plant-based nutrition. She happens to live in Canada. She's a phenomenal registered dietitian, and I said she's in Canada because what we're going to talk about today, if you don't happen to live there, is going to blow your mind. The Dietary Guide for Canada, much different than how it is in the vast majority of the world, including just south here in the United States. Night and day difference, and that's what we're going to talk about with dietitian Brenda Davis. Thank you so very much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chuck.
I'm so thrilled that you're back, and my goodness gracious, when it comes to the Dietary Guide in Canada, you have described it to me off camera as one of the most plant-friendly in the entire world. Why do you say that? That's a very bold statement, Brenda.
It's a very bold statement, but it's true. So basically, Canada's food guide for years, 60s, 70s, for years was this sort of a wheel with a sun in the center, and it was 4 food groups, and the top 2 groups were meat and dairy. And the bottom 2 were fruits and vegetables and whole grain, or not whole grains, but grains. And then it evolved to take the shape of a rainbow eventually. And when the rainbow first appeared, the meat and dairy groups ended up being the smallest arcs on the rainbow.
Wow.
And the grains and the fruits and vegetables were the largest. And eventually, the fruits and vegetables became the biggest arc on the rainbow. And then grains, and then dairy, and then meat. And that the 2007 was the last guide, and it was this rainbow with the fruits and vegetables. That's kind of the top of the rainbow. But in 2019, everything changed.
What happened?
So what happened was the Health Canada decided that they were going to produce a guide that was absolutely free of industry influence, that they were going to base their food guide and their dietary guidelines on science. What a concept.
Right.
So science, and they spent about 6 years they did 2 huge evidence reviews, and then they got input from about 27,000 Canadians. And that input included industry input, but when they were meeting with groups, they did not meet with industry, and they did not use industry-funded research.
Wow.
So what ended up, and I should say myself and my writing partner, Vasanto Molina, we were able to have input at several levels. So we were able to have input through our professional organization, Dietitians of Canada, and as individuals, we just, wrote what we needed to write, and then Vasanto, my writing partner, won the biggest award that Dietitians of Canada offers, called the Riley Jeffs Memorial Lecture Award, and it just happened that Hassan Hutchison, who was the then director of that part of Health Canada, went to her lecture, and she gifted him a copy of the comprehensive version of Becoming Vegan. It's a 600-page book that we co-authored. And then she followed up with him with a phone call, and he said the book they were using a lot. It was making its rounds, and they were really grateful for all the referencing. They were ordering a bunch of references from it. And so our asks were simple. I mean, we really let them know that we did not think dairy deserved to have its own category on a food guide, because simply it's culturally inappropriate in our view. There are so many groups that live so many people that live in Canada that are parts of races or from various parts of the world where they don't tolerate lactose very well.
Right.
And so we really emphasized that it's unnecessary to have dairy have its own category, but it's also not fair to those individuals who are part of our country that can't tolerate it either. And so that was one of our asks. Another ask was, to just focus more on plant-based protein sources as opposed to animal-based protein sources. Give them more recognition, give them more, a little more presence on the guide. We, of course, asked for, certainly to make it very clear that people shouldn't be eating a lot of highly processed foods, and we had a number of things that we were asking, and but in the end, the exciting part is that the guide is now, it's a plate. Half of the plate is fruits and vegetables. A quarter of the plate is whole grains, and they emphasize whole grains like quinoa and these kinds of grains. And then a quarter of the plate is protein foods. And what's really exciting is the protein foods, they emphasize, they even say in the literature very clearly that plant protein food should be included every day, and that plant protein food should be the first choice, should be the major protein foods we're choosing.
Hold on, I gotta turn my chair and look at you to talk about this. This is just incredible. Okay, so number one, the guide is acknowledging, one, that plants have protein. So where do you get your protein from? You can never ask that question again, basically, right?
Exactly. I mean, and it really focuses on legumes, nuts, and seeds as being really good protein sources that reduce the risk of disease, that are higher in fiber, that are low in saturated fat. And those are the protein sources Canadians should be choosing as their first choice, and more often. And that if you're choosing other, it should be very small portions. And it also, basically, it eliminated the dairy group completely.
Yeah.
There is no dairy group anymore, but dairy is a part of the protein group. So it could be a choice within the protein group. The only dairy that appears on the guide, to the best of my recollection, is a tiny little container that's yogurt. It could be soy yogurt for that matter. It could be dairy yogurt. It wouldn't matter. But that's the only thing. And then they show beside the guide a glass of water, and the water, just make water your beverage of choice.
Holy cow.
And that's the guide. And there is an awful lot of emphasis on shifting towards a plant-based direction.
My mind is officially blown right now. I fell in love with the city of Vancouver when I was there. It was my first time in Canada last fall, and there was a big part of me that didn't want to come back. It was like one of the most plant-friendly, plant-forward cities I had ever been to in my entire life. And so nice. Everybody was so nice.
Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear it.
So I want to talk about like how you all were able to, as a country, like keep the industry influence out of that. I feel like that is a monumental, nearly impossible task to do here. You have enormously powerful, meat lobby, dairy lobby.
Oh, we do. They were not happy campers.
So like,
and
how
I
did
live in Calgary, Alberta, and I hear all the time, can you believe what they did to the food guide? This is terrible. People are in Calgary is cow town, really, in Canada. And they're not happy that beef and dairy have been definitely reduced in their stature in the food guide.
But people got over it. Have you been able to monitor any sort of industry trends? Is there less meat consumption now that the guide has shifted?
Well, I think that's the task at this point, is to really operationalize the guide in terms of school, having a school food program that is reflective of the guide, having food services in hospitals that are reflective of the guide. And so that's the point that we're at. This is just 2019, the guide came out, and we're at the stage now where we're really trying to push the government to turn this into action on the ground. And so that's where things are at. But we're not quite there yet, but we definitely have a lot more weight in our push to go there. We need to stop subsidizing the industries that are responsible for increasing rates of chronic disease, and it's inconsistent with now our dietary guidelines and our food guide to be subsidizing these foods. So there are still a lot of things, a lot of distance we have to go, But that was a huge step in the right direction, because now that these are our guidelines and this is our food guide, we can really get to work in implementing,
I'll say there's going to be, I mean, change takes time, obviously.
It takes time.
But boy, are you guys off to a fantastic start, right? I mean, that's mind-blowing. What is the trickle-down effect in terms of what this is going to have on the diet for children? Because I know that's another thing that you're very passionate about. I was just talking with a pediatrician here at the conference, Dr. David Bowman, and we were talking about just how alarmingly poor the diet of children can be here in the States. What do you think the net effect will be of the diet guide shift in Canada on a child's diet?
Well, I have great hopes. I mean, I'm hopeful that we will get a school food program. I'm hopeful that it will be reflective of Canada's food guide. And as many parents use Canada's food guide to help them to design a diet that works for children. And so as they're doing so, they'll see the huge emphasis on fruits and vegetables and whole grains and plant-based proteins, and hopefully be incorporating more of those. The problem with diets for children is this. Parents, as human beings, we're really designed to be drawn towards foods that are hyper-palatable, that have a lot of salt, sugar, fat, all of those things. And children are naturally drawn to those foods. It's part of, human survival. And because they're so dilute in nature, we're drawn to them. And when when food companies end up concentrating those flavors in foods, it kind of messes with our appetite control. We can't stop eating, and we just want more and more of them. And so children, when you think of kids' foods, you think about kids' fast foods, you think about all the kids' cereals, all of the foods that are directed towards kids, these little, fishy crackers or whatever, they tend to be hyper palatable. They're high in sugar, they're high in salt, they're high in fat. And when parents feed those foods to kids, they don't want the other stuff.
Ooh.
And so that's where things start to go wrong. And I can remember when my kids were about maybe 1.5 and 4, I would say. And we very rarely ate out. But one day we were out shopping, and I took them to an Asian restaurant for lunch. And they were beyond themselves with excitement. They just could not believe their luck. And we had, rice and these veggie stir fries and tofu and such. And well, they were just loving the food and just eating it, because restaurant food does tend to be a little saltier, and it was very flavorful. And anyway, there was a lady sitting at the table next to us just staring at my kids, and her kids had grilled cheese sandwiches and french fries. And finally she looked at me and she said, "How in the heck do you get your kids to eat that stuff?" And I said, "Well, it's what you provide them with at home. To my kids, this is a huge treat, and they it's all they have is real food.
Yeah.
So this is way more salty. It's more it's got all of the flavors that." And she just couldn't believe it, that they were actually eating this stuff. And so when you start your kids off, I mean, my kids had never even tasted white rice or white bread. It just wasn't in the house.
Yeah.
And they always had healthy foods. And so, you start out with, your kids will eat what they're served, and they love what they're served. When they're little, it's all they know, right? But when you start to introduce all of those hyper palatable foods, they won't want Whole Foods so much anymore.
Yeah, so what's the trick? Because, I mean, unfortunately, the majority of kids are in that camp where those foods have been introduced. So how do you kind of wean them off of those and onto a healthier diet?
Yeah, and to me, the key is not to keep the stuff in the house. Just slowly decrease it and increase. When my kids would get home from school, it was always a plate of fruit and a plate of veggies with some dip. that was because I didn't want them to eat too much before supper.
Right.
But I wanted them to have healthy food. They would finish off an entire plate of veggies. Who cares how many veggies they eat at supper once they've eaten their whole plate of veggies before supper? But, it's just making sure that you're providing a lot of those whole foods. And even if they don't eat them at first, they will. Sometimes it can take 10 or 15 times when a new food is introduced before they'll actually eat the stuff. But just keep providing it and make it fun. So when we used to, make whatever foods we were making, we would create a theme. So it was like a Mexican theme or whatever it was. And we would sing a song about it and dance down the hall about it. And,
Dinner was fun at your house.
Kids, it was. Yeah. And the kids just loved when we would do these themes, and they would get all excited about it. And the other thing is to get the kids involved. Let them pick things, the fruits and vegetables out at the farmer's market. Let them or involve them in growing a few foods in the yard, or even in pots if you don't have a yard. Whatever. Yeah. Grow sprouts, grow herbs, grow whatever you can grow, and get them involved in that. And then let them help prepare food in the kitchen. I don't want to sound braggy, but by the time my kids were 10 years old, they could fix a meal, either one of them.
Love it.
And by the time, I can remember when my son was 14, my friend was having a birthday, and she said, "Oh, there's no good restaurants to go to in town." And he said, "Well, come to the restaurant at Corey. I'll make you a nice breakfast. I'll make you a nice birthday meal." And
14.
And so 14, and he made. He molded the rice to this, in this container, and then he did 3 different, dishes, Asian dishes, and he did a cheesecake, a millet cashew cheesecake with 2 different fruit sauces, and she was blown away. Oh, and he did the wraps, the different rice wraps with stuff as an appy before the meal, and he did the whole 9 yards, and she said, "This is better than any restaurant I've ever been to." But, when you get them involved and you get them cooking, they loved cooking, and they both became very, very good, efficient cooks. And my son still, he blows my mind every day I talk to him. The other day he said, "I made the best scrambled eggs, Mom, out of pumpkin seeds." He said, "It's a heck of a job getting the skins off the pumpkin seeds, but wow, that made good scrambled eggs." And then just yesterday or the day before, he was talking about making these black rice and lentil pancakes. That's it, black rice, lentils, and water. And he said, they get fluffy, you don't even need any leavening, and he was explaining how you do it. And
is he a chef by trade?
No, he's not.
Wow.
It's his hobby. He just enjoys it. He's actually, he has a master's in, he has an MBA and a master's in science. He's an environmental and an undergrad in environmental sciences. And
I can see the science. You kind of need to have a little bit of a sciencey, nerdy side to be a good cook in the kitchen,
he
so
just
you know what's doing.
It's just something he loves to do, so it's kind of fun. And when you would just instill that in them by getting them excited about food and food preparation, they love real whole foods.
That is neat. That is really something else right there. Last question I want to ask you here is about what the school lunches look like in Canada right now. So in the U.S., they are notoriously unhealthy, right? It's typically pizza and French fries and a carton of milk, and if you're lucky, you may get like a fruit cup or something like that. And sometimes that's even packed in syrup. What's the Canadian school lunch looking like?
We don't have a Canadian school lunch program.
Get out of town.
I'm not kidding you. Kids bring their lunches in little packages. I mean, some high schools have cafeterias where kids can purchase a lunch. But no, there is no school lunch program.
Wow.
So that's, I think it would be nice to have one based on Canada's food guide and start to have a school lunch program, but we don't at this stage. Wow. Kids just bring lunch from home, sandwich and an apple and some cookies usually, or something like that.
Wow. Okay. Was not expecting that answer. The good news is, if one were implemented here in the U.S., the pizza, the French fries, the milk, the fruit cup, and heavy syrup, all of that is well within our dietary guidelines.
Yeah, which
It's
is
based
pretty
off of
scary.
it, yeah. So at least you have the healthy guide that could be followed. So, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I would love to have you back. You are a joy to talk to. Matter of fact, I want to have your son on the show just so I can get some recipe ideas.
Oh, I'm sure he would love that.
I mean, that is just incredible. I mean, 14, the boy's whipping up some gourmet stuff.
Yeah, well, you want to hear something funny? When he was about 2 years old, if I served peas and mashed potatoes and then some sort of veggie loaf or something, he would take his potatoes and he'd put the peas all around. It'd have to look pretty before he started eating.
That's half of it, right? It's like you have to have a pretty plate before the customer can eat it. I mean, this guy, you tell him he's got a fan. You tell him he has a fan.
Well, you know what? I got to add one other story about him because this one will just blow your mind. So he was about 3 years old, and I'd never explained to him yet that we were vegetarian or why we were vegetarian. And we were driving by McDonald's, and he says, "Mom, I really would like to have a McDonald's hamburger." So I thought, okay, now's the time. I need to tell him. So I said to him, I said, "Honey," I said, "you know, the hamburgers at McDonald's don't grow on trees," because they had the commercials back then of the Hamburglar stealing the hamburgers on the, and I said, "They don't grow on trees." I said, "The hamburgers at McDonald's are made of cows." And he looked at me as if I had just gone insane. And he said, "Mummy," he said, "people do not eat cows." Like, it was so stupid. Aww. So then he looked at me and he said, "Do they? Do they, Mummy?" And I said, "I'm afraid so. They eat cows and other animals too." And he said, "But Mummy," he said, "them have eyes."
Wow.
He said, "Mummy, them have noses, them have mouths, them have ears, them have babies." He said, "Mummy, don't they know that cows are people too?"
Aww.
And I thought, he just gets it.
I'm telling you.
The kid just gets it.
Well, you tell that kid he's got a double fan now. All right, he gets it and he can cook. That's a special human being right there. That is a special guy. You are also equally special. Thank you so much. It's been great sharing this time with you.
Oh, thank you so much. It was really fun. Yeah, thanks for what you do, Chuck.
And thank you. If your health IQ is a couple of points higher than it was a few minutes ago, go ahead and like this video or subscribe to the YouTube channel. And to take it even higher, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your favorite shows. Look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit the subscribe button there as well and help to make your world a healthier place.